All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone. I am Laura Knapp from WorldCap, and I am the virtual room host for today's workshop, the Midas, My Identity Tells a Story. I would like to remind you just a few items before our presenter, Erica Snowden, gets started. So please feel free to use the chat box located at the bottom throughout this session, and keep yourself on mute while the presenter is speaking. And just as a reminder, there's a link to our conference agreements. I will post that in the chat box in just a few minutes. And at the end of the workshop session, the presenter, Erica, will stay online for about 20 minutes for Q&A for participants. And also don't forget to fill out the evaluation at the end of the workshop session to get into this awesome drawing for door prizes. So stay tuned for that. It'll happen towards the closing session. I just want to thank all of you for being here today for this workshop. And My Identity Tells a Story is being facilitated by Erica Snowden. So Erica Snowden is a Detroit native. She's been an educator for 18 years within the Friends Schools network. She has taught several grades from pre-kindergarten through 12th grade. Erica has earned her bachelor's in biology from Lincoln University, a master's in the art of teaching from Mary Grove College, and a master's in educational leadership from the University of Pennsylvania. Currently, she is the Director of Equity, Belonging, and Inclusion at Friends Central School. Erica has spent the last 7 years of her career with a very intentional purpose to promote social justice and identity-based conversations within students, parents, and colleague groups. She's also the contributing author to the guide for white women who teach Black boys and teaching beautiful, brilliant Black girls. Erica is also recipient of the 2019 Diversity is magazine's Leadership in Diversity Award. At this time, I'd like to give a warm welcome to Ms. Erica Snowden.
Thank you so much, Laura. Thank you all for being here. It's so great to see so many people online today. So I'm going to say good morning to you. And where I am in Philadelphia, it's afternoon. It's 2:34 here. And I'm just so excited to be with you all again. I hope that someday we can do this and I can come and visit you all and get a glimpse into your world. Super excited that you all are here and glad that people are in the chat saying that they are excited to be in this session. I am going to get started shortly, but I do want to ask you all to participate in the chat. There are going to be times where I'm going to be asking you to pop stuff in the chat. I also want you to ask questions throughout. I'm going to try to monitor that for sure. Oh my gosh, snow today. Oh my goodness. We have uncanny weather here. It is 70 degrees today. I'm overdressed. And so global climate change is so real and important. And so I just hope that you all get into it, ask questions, and then definitely at the end, I want to give time for feedback, for questions. If people are like, can you go back to that slide so I can grab a picture of it or something like that? Let's really do that. And I think I'm also going to be given a PDF of the entire presentation. So you'll be able to access that later too. So let's just jump right in. I'm going to share my screen. And so welcome to the Midas Touch. I don't know how many of you know about the Midas Touch, the story, whether it's kind of the fable or the retelling that's in the Bible of that, everything you touch turns to gold, right? And that everything that you do is successful. And what I thought about was how I could change this and think about how my identity tells a story. And I hope that today I encourage you all to feel empowered and feel some agency around your own identities and how you can put that into your classrooms, into your after school programs, into everything that you do, because it's so important. And so this is just a little bit about me. Laura, thank you so much for reading my bio. It's always weird to have people like talk about you while you're there and read your bio. So I really appreciate that. Here are some ways that you can follow me. And if we just jump in, I want to tell you that I am a Black cisgender woman. I'm a daughter, a mother, a sister, a friend, educator, social justice warrior, a baby baker. I wish I was like an adult size baker and I could like really do amazing things. My stuff normally tastes good, but I can't really decorate. That's something I need to improve at. I am a super taster, so I've done some tests where like you test to see if you can really taste different things. I consider myself to be a fly nerd because I love to learn, and I'm a learner, always, all the time. And presently, like I said, I'm in technically, this suburb is called Wynwood, but it's right outside of Philadelphia. And these surrounding areas are the original land of the Lenape people. And I just want to acknowledge their continued existence as a people, honoring the Lenape folks as the original caretakers of this land, recognizing the histories of land theft, violence, erasure, and oppression that's brought me, my institution, and all of us here. And so if you all want to drop in a chat, whose land are you on, right? For sure, we want to make sure that we are representing Indigenous folks who have been here before us and still are here today. So if you want to drop that in the chat, please feel free to do that. When I do this work, I like to always start with the 4 agreements, which come from Glenn Singleton's work in Courageous Conversations. And it's really just something to help us guide our conversations as I see all of the folks whose land we are on and where we're coming from. I really appreciate you dropping that in the chat. When we think about these conversations, like what are some agreements that we need in order to have the best conversations possible, right? And so I like the 4 agreements. It's not too many, and you can expand upon them if you'd like. The first one is to stay present and engaged. We are online in a virtual world. And so as much as you can, stay present and engaged, right? And self-care is advised. So if you need to turn your camera off or you need to get a drink of water, please take care of yourself. If you need to put on your Blu-ray glasses, like do that. Make sure you take care of yourself as you stay present and engaged. Also, lean into discomfort. And then with that, expand your comfort zone. And so if something comes up and it makes you feel uncomfortable, acknowledge that, kind of lean in so that you can grow in your comfortability, right? And so with practice, you become less uncomfortable with these topics. Of course, speak your truth. I want you to drop stuff in the chat like you're doing now, and speak from your heart. And when you speak from the truth, I think it's always good to think about the acronym THINK, right? Is it true? Is it honest? Is it inspiring? Is it necessary? Is it kind, right? And I love that we already have some community guidelines about how we engage in this and how we have a code of conduct around this. So that's just really beautiful. The last part is to expect and accept a lack of closure. Sometimes this one feels really hard for me, but you know, at the end of my time today, I think I have until 3:45 my time. You know, we may not get to all the questions. We may not get everything done that we want, and you might want to learn more and keep talking to people that you've chatted with here, right? How can you continue after this is a good question to think about, but understanding that you can accept that and expect that it won't be all nicely wrapped up at the end. And last but not least, I think it's important to think about that the stories stay and the lessons learned leave. And so if people share in the chat some stories about themselves, we don't want to go and tell somebody else a story as if it's our own story. But if there was a message, a huge learning from that we take away, then yeah, go and tell people that, hey, I was in this amazing workshop. That's me patting myself on the back. I was in this amazing workshop, and someone in the chat said something about this, and it really made me think about how I should learn more about that. And so please make sure that we hold each other up in this space. Does anybody else have any agreements or things that you like to use when you engage in conversations around identity? Just checking the chat here. Also, I should remind you all that I have always taught in Quaker schools. And although I don't identify as Quaker, I feel like I'm partially Quaker. And so I'm comfortable with the silence. So sometimes it's okay for me to like sit with the silence a little bit as people think, right? And have some time to, just gather their thoughts and drop them in the chat. All right. And if you think of any later, then definitely drop those in. I know sometimes people talk about being in a safe space, and I will speak to that. I don't normally call spaces safe. A lot of times I say a brave space because honestly, especially in our world today, I can't provide total safety and I can't provide emotional safety. And so, I think that if we can go into it with an idea of being brave and courageous, that will help us to get into feelings where we might think individually that this feels safe. Courtney, thanks. Assume that's the intent. We're all learning here. Yeah, for sure. I love that, right? And I would say the flip side of that is also like if your impact doesn't match your intent, right? How do you make it right? Awesome. Thanks for sharing. So today, as we get into thinking about how our identities tell a story, my identity tells a story. And the story that my identity tells is going to be different from every other story, right? And every other person. And they might overlap. They might have some similarities, but they're all special and different. And when we talk about these stories today, I want you to think about the big identities that we think about often, which are listed here, these social identities. But I also want you to think about some other identities too that are sometimes lost in the sauce. Some identities that don't get as much of our time and our thought and our intention, right? But yeah, as you think about your identities, think about what it means for you at the age that you're at right now. What is it about your gender, your sexual orientation, your ability, your nationality, class, race, ethnicity, religion, right? How do those identities tell a story within you? How have they shaped you and your experience? And based on how they shape you and your experience, how do you bring those into your classroom, into your programming, into your after school experience, where then you allow your students around you, and also I would say your coworkers, your colleagues, to also feel empowered enough to let their identities tell a story in the space too, right? So that we create a space of belonging, a space of inclusion. And so I say all of that and I talk about our different identities. And so I can't talk about how they come together and flow and intersect without talking about intersectionality, which comes from Kimberly Crenshaw's work, where she says that intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it locks and intersects. It is the acknowledgement that everyone has their own unique experiences of discrimination and privilege, right? There are times where we are in the mainstream and times where we are in the margins, right? Or are underrepresented. And when I talk to you about those initial social identities that we often talk about, here you see that there are a few more, right? So thinking about education, right? Where does that put us as far as our identities and how we are shaped and how that affects our experience? One that I've really been thinking about a lot is body size, right? And so as I am a more curvy woman, I realize that society hasn't always been pleased with my body shape. And so how does that influence and help me to tell a story, right? Because my identity tells a story. As you look at this slide and you think about these different identities, just pop into the chat for a second. What are some of the identities that you're thinking about that come up for you as feeling like most important to you, or identities that you think about all the time? Urban, indigenous, rural, indigenous, beautiful, thank you. White, cis, queer, fat woman, I love it. Thank you, Carolyn. Ability, mental health, class, for sure. Talking about class is still one thing that makes me uncomfortable. No matter how much I do this work, it still makes me uncomfortable thinking about how how my class has changed over my lifetime, the class that I was born into, mental health, body size, sexuality, education, Black ability, education. Yes, thank you, folks. Thanks for sharing. Who am I, where I come from, who am I connected to? Age, education, mental health, lifelong learner, curious, avid reader, education lover. Awesome. So all these identities, like how do we tell a story with our identities, right? How do we bring these aspects of ourselves into our work, right? Financial independence, code switching, depending on who you are with. Yeah, for sure. Gender, awesome. Spirituality, heritage, beautiful. You can keep them coming. So when I think about my identity telling a story, and I think about a book that changed my life, the book that comes up is this one right here, The Coldest Winter Ever by Sister Soja. And it is, this book came out, I think, in like the early 90s. And I mean, it changed my life because it was the first time that I read a book where I felt like, oh my goodness, so many aspects of my identity are present in this book. I see myself in this book. I can't believe someone wrote a book thinking about me. It's like they knew parts of my life and they wrote this book, right? And so when I read this book, it covered my gender, it covered my race. It made me think about geographical location. Even though it took place in New York and I grew up in Detroit, it was like a city. It was a city that was rife with crime. And that was the situation I was growing up in. I was younger. The main character, Winter, her class, her family structure was similar to mine. She was a teenager in high school going through all these things. And so when I think about how that book shaped me and how it allowed me to see that my identity was important, that these aspects of me were not just important, but important enough to write a book about and then to have somebody else read about, I was like, whoa, I got a story on my hands. And so then I thought about how can I take my story and share it with others? And the important thing to note is that this book allowed me to see into this concept, which I didn't know about then, called windows and mirrors. And windows and mirrors is a concept that both Annalise Stahl and Rudine Sims Bishop have talked about and helped to coin these terms. Rudine Sims Bishop says, when children cannot find themselves reflected in the books they read, or when the images they see are distorted, negative, or laughable, they learn a powerful lesson about how they are devalued in the society of which they are a part. So for me, reading The Coldest Winter Ever said I had value just because I found myself in a book, right? And whether it was intentional or unintentional, just realizing that when we introduce students to books, when we introduce them to ourselves through books, when we introduce them to our multiple identities, right? We allow them to find value in themselves and in people who are different from them, whether we are a mirror or a window for them, right? And here's the kicker. Rudine Sims Bishop says, if they see only reflections of themselves, they will grow up with an exaggerated sense of their own importance and value in the world, a dangerous ethnocentrism. So basically, if all you see are mirrors of yourself, right, then you can possibly grow up with a big ego. and you become a narcissist basically, and you think only you matter, right? And so how do we give this balance of windows and mirrors, right? And I would go so far as to say that it's not even a balance, because our world actually over inundates us with whiteness that we can't really beat out that, so we're always trying to do more. If you are a person of the global majority, if you are an underrepresented person, if you find yourself in marginalized areas, you actually have to constantly pour into yourself to build positive identity development, so that you realize my identity tells a story, and it's important enough for other people to know those stories and to hear about that story. And then Emily Stiles, she took it even further than Rudine, and she says, traditionally, and I mean, she just talked to the specifics about this. Traditionally, curriculum gives white males many mirrors to look in and few windows which frame others' lives. Women and men of color, on the other hand, find almost no mirrors of themselves in the curriculum. For them, it is often all windows. So she took it and made it even more specific and said, like, we need to give windows to certain individuals, specifically white males, because they have an abundance of mirrors. And so we don't want to harm them by making them think that only their identities tell a story. So we have to bring in these windows so that they know that the identities of other people tell a story also, right? And if you're listening to this, you're reading this slide, if you have comments and things coming up, please drop them in the chat. And so, with all of that, as you think about windows and mirrors, when you think about your multiple identities and how they intersect, when you think about how your identity tells a story, and some of that is about reflection, right? How we have to realize that, there are aspects of me that I couldn't always really love in the best way. And it's a journey every day to love those parts of me that maybe the society tells me are not that good or are not the best, and things like that. Like, how do I do that work to continue to find the liberation, the joy, the resilience in my own story, right? Because my identity tells a story. I have to continue to cultivate my story. I get to take charge of that narrative and write my own story and tell it in a way that I want to tell it, because no one else has to speak for me, right? And so then, as educators, as people who are helping to mold the lives of children, right, we have to start thinking about, okay, how can we use literacy in a way to make it equitable, and think about what identities are represented in our curriculums, in our libraries, in our home, on the walls, in the classroom, so that our students know that their identities tell a story. And I would even go so far as to say, that remind us that our identities tell a story too, right? Because if we do so much for our students and we look around and we don't have any mirrors for ourselves, then we might forget that our identities tell a story too. So how do we make sure we incorporate both? And so I just want to share this with you. I don't know how many people have seen this before. If you've seen it before, please drop it in the chat, and say that you've seen this before. But this diagram, every time I see it, I am just like reminded of how much work we need to do around diversity in children's books. So the graphic here is from 2018, and then I was able to find some updated information for 2019, even though it's not as beautiful as this graphic here. But just imagine, right, that there are more books about animals than there are about people who identify as African, African American, Asian, Pacific Islander, Asian, Pacific American, Latinx, American Indians, First Nations. So there are more books about animals than people of color. Like, more books about animals than the global majority. And I know you hear me saying global majority because if you think about our world, all right, as a whole, there are more people of color than not. So we've actually been lied to for a long time that we are the minority. Actually, we are the global majority, right? And then if you look at that and you go like, wow, it's more books about animals, bears and cats and dogs than then children with all of these identities, whose identities tell a story, and then go further and see that 50% of children's books are about white folks. And I don't have the graphic for this, but then if we start thinking about books with main characters who are boys versus girls, right? Which gives us a binary, which can also be harsh, right? So then you have to ask yourself, all right, what about books for kids who are trans? What about books for kids who are non-binary and gender non-conforming? And then think about family structure, right? So I grew up in a two-parent home, but now I'm a single parent, right? So where are the books with single parents? Where are the books with students who are raised, who've been adopted? Where are the books with students who are raised by their grandparents? Where are the books with two mom families, two dad families, right? And so when we think about how we can help, children realize that their identities tell a story, and ourselves as well, we got to think about, like, what are the books that we're placing out there? And I would encourage you all, if you don't see the books that you want, to write them. And I've been trying to tell myself that too, right? And so in 2019, I was able to find that, like, okay, some of the numbers improved just a tad bit, right? But still lots of work to do. And at this point, I almost feel like we might not need more books about white folks, so we can just catch up to all these other things. Like, there are enough out there right now, or maybe there are enough animal books out there. Like, how do we really take an intentional idea to, like, make sure that we improve the literature that's out there? Oh, Andrew, you said the same problem led me to reading novels that were far above my reading level. I had to search so hard growing up to find novels that reflect my Latino culture. Yes, yes. Like, you don't even realize sometimes, like, you're going on a search to find a mirror, even if students don't have that language, they're going on a search to find a mirror, and then you end up reading material that is above you, or too hard, or maybe sometimes too easy, right? Because you're just trying to find something where you can see yourself, where you can be affirmed, and, like, my identity tells a story. Yeah. Monica says, I was just looking at the ethnicity breakout of the Anchorage School District and the individual schools. My school in particular is 93.5% non-white. Wow, that's beautiful. And then how many of the teachers are non-white? Yeah, not until the 90s that I took a native literature class. That was a game changer. Yes. Why do we have to wait till so late? Or, why did my first classes that really looked at, like, African American culture and history not happen until college? I mean, I should have known about those things when I was in elementary, middle, high school, right? And so I want to share with you this piece from Emily Jane Stiles, who this for me has been life changing. And I I I use this for almost everything that I do now, and I try to remain thoughtful about it. Emily said, half the curriculum walks in with the students. And I don't know how many of us think that way or believe that. But when our students come in, they are coming in with knowledge and experiences and perspectives and factoids and identities that tell a story. And those things are half of the curriculum. They are not empty slates, as we sometimes call them. I remember learning that growing up in my teaching programs. Like, kids are coming in, they're empty slates, and whoa, that is massively wrong if we think that when they come in, they're empty slates and now we just fill them up. No, they have things to offer us. And so Emily Jane Stiles has this perspective about that you need to have 50% of the self in your curriculum and 50% of the shelves in the curriculum, right? So how are you accessing the scholarship within your students, within yourselves, right? And then using that to pair with the scholarship on the shelf. So how do I take what's already inherently inside you and valuable, right? And let you know that your identity tells a story, and then pair it with some other knowledge to say, hey, these things can come together, Like, how can we compare and contrast them, right? Or how do you see yourself in this? If you don't see yourself in that, then let's find out where you are, right? Which leads us into critical literacy, right? Which involves reading critically, thinking about the identity and intent of the writer and the social and historical context in which the text was written. So as you read, right, if you're balancing the selves and the shelves, right, you go, well, like, well, who was the author of this book? Right? Why did this author write this piece? Who do you think they wrote it for? Whose voice is represented? Whose voices are missing? What are the issues of power that are represented here? How are they portraying women? How are they portraying boys? How are they portraying parents and families, right? How are they portraying gender, right? So this critical literacy piece that even if it's not a mirror for you, we can think about it and talk about it critically so that you can then go on a journey. You can go and investigate and be a detective and look for windows to pair with it. And so this is just something that I found from Dana Reesport, which gives like some clear-cut critical literacy classroom practices and goals, right? That you can identify the voices in the text. We're reading this book. Okay, whose voice is here, right? What's the dominant cultural discourse that's here? What are some possible meanings and readings? How can we connect what we're reading that seems pretty innocuous to social justice, right? How do we find other texts to supplement this and find multiple perspectives for those that are not here and present in this text? And I think even more so is that how does this propel us to take social action, to improve our world, to improve what we're doing? So I want to share with you for a moment a book called Milo's Museum by Zeta Elliott. And as I'm reading it to you, I'm not going to read the whole thing, I'm just going to read a couple of pages. I want you to look for windows and mirrors in the couple of pages that I'm going to read. I want you to pop them in the chat if you can, right? What was a window for you? What was a mirror, right? And I want you to think about like whose voice is present, whose voice is missing, right? Because then when you think about these things, then you can send your students out to like, okay, let's find the missing voices and let's share their stories. And so if my identity isn't told in this story, I'm going to find an identity. I'm going to find a story where I can tell my identity story. Or maybe I'm going to write my own version of this book so that I can really have a story that's going to tell my identity story that's going to be a mirror for me. So I'm going to stop sharing this for a minute just so I can open up and get to the PDF of the book. So as you're listening, and I believe that picture books are great for every age and also for adults as well. And the research tells us that, even when we get older, we really still like to be read to, which is why Audible is such a huge thing right now, which I really love, especially when we get certain people who read those things. So this is Milo's Museum. Please don't judge me about all my tabs at the top. I have this weird thing about me where I think that if I close out a tab, it will utterly be gone into the universe forever. And I know that's not true, but it's hard to tell myself that that's not true. This was also illustrated by Purple Wong. Leah, you make me feel seen. Marissa, yes, thank you. Aletha, yes. I'm not the only one. I have friends out here. Milo's Museum. Milo woke up feeling excited. Today, her class was going to the museum. Mommy and Daddy had to work, but Papa went along as a chaperone. When they reached the museum, Milo's teacher told the class that their tour guide was called a docent. A docent is a person who teaches us about what's inside the museum, Miss Lou explained. The docent was a white-haired woman named Anne. She led the children from room to room, stopping to tell them interesting things about certain sculptures and paintings. Once the tour was over, Miss Lou gave the children some time to explore the museum on their own. Milo held her grandfather's hand as they wandered through the rooms together. She stopped in front of a giant mirror and looked at her reflection. Milo could see her classmates admiring the works of art. She liked most of the art too, but something didn't feel right. Milo tugged at her grandfather's hand. What are museums for, Papa? Well, he said, museums hold all the objects that people feel are valuable or important, things from long ago and from today. Museums are full of stories, really. Does that answer your question? Milo nodded to show Papa she understood, but she still felt funny inside. When they got home, Milo sat on the front porch and watched her world go by. She waved at neighbors as they walked along the sidewalk and nodded her head to the beat when a car drove by down the street blasting rap music. Milo hummed along as the ice cream truck circled the block, trailed by laughing kids clutching dollar bills. So many faces, sounds, and stories made up her world, but none of it was in the museum. Milo frowned. So I'm going to stop there. And I'm seeing some stuff come in the chat. Want to check it out. What windows and mirrors popped up for you there? Like, what did you notice? What are some windows and mirrors that popped up for you just in that short time? Window having two parents in a relationship with grandfather, interned at the Museum of the North. Window being proximate to having a relationship with a grandparent. Beautiful. For me, some mirrors were the neighborhood, having people drive down with the loud music and the ice cream truck. I remember chasing it, trying to get an ice cream, right? Also a mirror for me, having a trusted adult I can ask questions of. Beautiful. Mirror of a white woman in position of knowledge. Ooh, that's beautifully framed. Thank you. Window into Milo's experience. Museum was a mirror, right? Docent, women, white, raised by grandparent, ice cream truck coming during nap time. Yeah. So many windows and mirrors here for us, right? And so even in that short time, 4 pages, we can think about how this story either is a window for us or a mirror, how aspects of our identity are told in the story or not, right? And it helps us shape our experience when we take children to museums and do other things that, are we allowing them to see themselves as important, too important, or not important at all? And so even in this one book, you can start to have conversations about race, sexual orientation, family structure, age, gender, even class, right? And so how from one book can we help students realize that my identity tells a story, right? Because we don't want to give them what Chimamanda calls the danger of a single story. She says stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize, which is what we want to do when we realize that my identity tells a story. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. When we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, any kind of people I'm going to add in there, any person, we regain a kind of paradise. So how do we empower ourselves and our students to realize that my identity tells a story, right? And so does someone else's. And we need to share our stories to heal each other and to humanize each other, to empower each other. And so with that, I'm going to run through some books right now so we can get to some questions, because a lot of times people are thinking about like, okay, what are some books that are going to help me do this? Yes, Kristen, her writing is worthwhile. Her TED Talk is amazing. Pretty much anything she does is awesome. And so when you think about how do you start to decolonize your libraries and create a space that visually has more windows and mirrors, which allows you to help your students find ways in which their identities tell a story and to see themselves reflected back at them, to then also learn about people who are different from them and to break down stereotypes and misconceptions that we're constantly fed through the media. Here are some books that I really enjoy. For nursery through 2nd grade. Pink is for boys. Harriet Gets Carried Away. Our Scan, We're Different, We're the Same. And some of these are around race. Some are around gender. This Harriet Gets Carried Away, I love this book because when you first look at it, you're like, oh, this is just a kid who likes to play dress up and goes on a journey with her family. But then If you look at her parents, her caregivers, it's a two-parent home, but it's two dads who are caring for her. Also, she has brown skin. And so when we talk about skin color, how can we incorporate that into the book? One of her parents has brown skin. One of her parents has really light skin. Who is that a mirror for, right? And so how do we have these conversations just from books so that students know that their identities tell a story? The Skin You Live In, these books are for about grades 3 through 5. M is for Melanin. When We Were Alone, a book I really love when I talk about Indigenous folks and thinking about residential schools and the harm that did, but also the resistance and the resilience and the liberation found in Indigenous folks who would make sure that they spoke their language in private and hide, or they would go and try to find someone who was their family, even to hug them just for a moment, right? So that resilience is also important to add in and to give joy, because we don't want all the stories that are mirrors for certain people to be negative, to be sad, right? A book about families, which actually gives pictures of different kinds of families, so they aren't cartoon characters or anything like that. So thinking about the balance of photography. Yes, you're going to get a PDF of this entire slide deck. And so you'll have them with the names of the books and the titles and the pictures for you as well. And then Heartpicked, which I really love. I don't know if you know, but November is Adoption Awareness Month. And so we did some programming last week and wrote this book and read this book. And one thing I love about it is that it's a Black family who adopts. And so oftentimes we have this idea that only white families adopt or something like that, or only Asian folks are adopted. And so it really gives us a chance to change that narrative, right? And to tell more than one single story. Thomas, thank you for dropping that in the chat. Okay, dropping some knowledge, a great list of anti-racism kids book from the Anchorage Public Library. I'm going to have to make sure I snag that one before I get off the call today. 6th graders through 8th graders in middle school. This book is anti-racist. This is Tiffany Jewell is my Distinguished Justice Speaker for the year. She's been doing some work with our school. This is an amazing book to start having these conversations, to learn and talk about language and have a common vocabulary when you're talking about anti-racism. Jacqueline Woodson's Harbor Me. Love this text because there are several main characters who all get a chance to tell their stories. And so if you're talking about like a Midas Touch with several students, that's it right there. Also, Not My Idea, a book about whiteness. Just Ask, a book about ability. This book is actually called George. And the reason why you see it scratched out here is because librarians have started to scratch out George and say Melissa's story, because it's the story of a trans kid. And what people really realized later on, and also the author Alex Gino realized, was that he should not have named the book after the student's dead name, which is the name that it was given to him the name that was given to her when she was born, right? And so I think this is the beautiful way to also talk about like liberation and revolutionizing and resisting, right? That I could do this work. Ooh, Harbor Me is a battle book for middle schools this year. I'd love to learn more about that. And then, of course, upper school students, Your Legacy. This is a picture book, but it is a new reclamation of the history of enslavement for Black folks. And it is so powerful. It's such a like punch you in the face. We're going to find this liberation and this joy and resistance there. It's really dope. I think that if you have to teach that hard history, it's a great way to pair it with a text that has joy in it. Tell Me Who You Are has all these stories of different folks whose identities tell a story. And so it's like, I don't know, 50 different Midas Touch stories in there. Little Fires Everywhere. Gotta love this book and how it takes you on a roller coaster of all many aspects of identity. All Boys Are in Blue. Of course, They're There by Tommy Orange. And then Because You Can't Leave Us Adults Out, The Guide for White Women Who Teach Black Boys. I know it's called that, but it's for everyone. I go back in it and I check it out and reread it. So you want to talk about race, how to be anti-racist, and Indigenous people's history of the United States. It's a great one. And then this book is Gay by Juno Dawson. Really helps because I know for some of the people in my community, when we think about pronouns and new language around gender and sexual orientation. It's just like a really good one-on-one book to help people to think about and practice how they're going to affirm people better in their language. Yes, I love Kendi. His book, Anti-Racist Baby, is also amazing. So I'm going to stop here and leave you with like, how does your identity tell a story? And encourage you to think about like how you think about how your identity tells a story and how you are helping your students tell their stories already, or what are some ways that you want to do that, and any other thing that you want to share at this point. So I want to stop sharing, and hopefully if people want to share out, you can unmute and share, ask a question, drop it in the chat. I know with educators all the time, it's like, okay, what's one thing that I can walk away with? And so if you saw one good book that you're like, okay, I want to grab that one, great. If you saw one good quote or heard one good thing, it's nice to be able to walk away with something. So I'm going to leave some space for people to share. Hopefully you all can unmute yourselves and share. So many great people on today. The numbers have grown. You will get a PDF of this entire presentation. And so you'll get the books in there for sure. Thoughts, questions?
Erica,
I have a question. I'm sorry.
go ahead, Georgiana.
Yeah, there's been a lot of articles when I saw that 1% of Indigenous books. You know, as a Native person, you kind of know that. I know that there's districts out there who spend a lot of time creating and writing and making their own books, like Lower Kuskokwim. They're well known for that. But here's a question for you, and this is something that I know I have a problem with this, and I'm sure that other people of color see this at, you know, at the university level. Like, here's an example at the university level, like seeing a Caucasian professor teaching Native studies, right? And you know that, you know, I come from a background where everyone has a culture, you know, that as teachers, you know, we're ingrained in that, right? People don't come to you without a culture, and you know, sometimes we get very used to putting labels on people. But as a person of color, how do you kind of align this feeling inside that, you know, that's not your place to teach this, versus telling stories or giving information, or, you know, sharing your experiences while about teaching this culture? And so I know that I'm probably not the only person who has this dilemma, but trying to align my personal feeling with knowing that, you know, that they have expertise, they studied this, you know, they probably have a background in teaching about another culture. But is this something that you've, I don't know, it's kind of hard to put into words, but I have this visceral reaction, and I'm trying to tamper that down and let them do their job and have their expertise. But, you know, I know that this is something that's come up before as well.
Georgiana, thank you so much for sharing and asking that question. I think it's a hard one to answer, but if I'm going to try my best, and hopefully I'm understanding you correctly. So one thing that I constantly navigate is my self-care. And so some days I'm ready to teach, or like I like to say, get somebody told. And then some days I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to ignore that today because I need to maintain my peace, right? So that's like a constant balancing act. And then I have a lot of my work with teachers has been about helping them to access the scholarship in themselves, so the scholarship in the students, so that they create and cultivate a space where the experiences from those students are welcomed into the classroom from the beginning. And also the idea that we are facilitators, we are guides. We don't have to know everything, and that we are not the only teachers, right? That our students, whether grad students, whether 7th graders or preschoolers, okay, can teach us something. I was doing a reading the other week about Diwali, and I have a student who is Hindu and started to tell me in pre-K, okay, started to tell me what they do for their celebration, things I didn't know. And I said, oh my goodness, we have an expert here. Let's get this friend and tell us like what they do, because I've never done an actual celebration. Like, what do you do, right? And it sounds very, very elementary, but I think that professors would actually grow and be better at their jobs if they access the scholarship in their students, in the folks that are there. And also, if you feel the agency, go to the people who are helping to hire these folks, who are helping to create the curriculum, and say, like, how can we get, more folks of color who are teaching these classrooms? If we can't get more folks of color to come in because of tenure and all the other excuses that people get, how can we get more speakers to come in and present, right, from these underrepresented groups to give another aspect? Or how can we help our community to realize that we should be beyond the lecture scenario in 2021, right? We should be having engaging conversations where like a professor or a teacher presents some kind of idea, and then we all can add to it to grow our knowledge and understanding and have great discourse. So I hope that that is helpful. And I will just say that I really hear you when you say, sometimes you're annoyed. I mean, I know people who are teaching African American history courses and are doing harm. And it's really annoying. And it's tough, right? And so like, how do you do this? And some of my work on the side is also giving students agency and helping them to develop their advocacy and practice how to engage in discourse with their teachers in these ways to say like, hey, I know you heard that and I appreciate you saying that, but can you expound more on that? Because that felt to me like a microaggression, or that seemed to be biased, or a student told me the other day, how can I talk to this teacher because they wrote all over my paper because I used they, them pronouns, and they said it's grammatically incorrect. And so we did a practice session so they can then go and talk to the teacher, and they were able to get a conversation with the teacher for the teacher to go like, oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking in this one way and I had to think about that. Thank you for bringing it to my attention. Right. So a lot of it is practice, and we have a lot of work to do. Thank you. And I see some stuff in the chat too. Specifically asking people who identify with that identity to come in and teach. Thomas, did you have something?
Yeah, first off, Erica, I can listen to your presentations like every year at conference. Thank you for coming back and joining us again. My question is, right now, nationally and here in Alaska locally, we are seeing this kind of increased fight around this idea of like this conservative ideology around critical race theory, around banning books that have queer or transgendered characters in our schools or in our community libraries. How do we help dissect the dialogue with our students about that, knowing that our students are caught in the crosshairs of hearing, this thing that's happening around them? They may have never even seen the book, but they know something is happening, and maybe a conversation at home or not, or they're coming across it in other ways. How do you recommend having that conversation with students around these topics that are really this part that they're getting caught in, that everyone's talking about the thing that they may read or do or know or experience, but not talking to them about it?
Yeah, this is a real tough one, and it's definitely a balancing act, because I I don't want to encourage people to do things that could have their jobs in jeopardy. Um, what I will say though is if you, okay, one, if you find elements in your school's mission or vision and goals that can drive the conversation, right? That's my secret sauce. So when people ask me to do things, a lot of times I can go back to Quakerism and I'm like, wait a minute. Quakers believe in equality or integrity, and this is integrity. This is equality. Like, how could that not be the same, right? Or this is stewardship, right? Or if people say like, oh, we want to build intellect in our students so that they can change the world. Well, how can people change the world if they're not aware of like all the different perspectives in our world, right? And so like trying to find the little spots where you can use the mission to tag onto that. I'll also say that going back to Emily Stiles, 50% of the text, 50% of the selves, if someone says, well, you can't teach that, I'm like, well, these are mirrors of the kids in my classroom. Would you rather me make them feel like they don't have value and that they don't exist in this world or in this history, right? And if you're worried about the feelings of these people, are you worried about the feelings of those people too? And something that I've been doing more recently, and I've been trying to get my teachers to do, is I've been talking about how white supremacy hurts white people too. And if you read Heather McGhee's The Sum of Us, it can give you some ideas about that as well. And also Layla Saad's Me and White Supremacy. But the fact that white supremacy made folks who identify as Irish, Jewish, Polish, and all these other identities lose aspects of their culture and tradition and then only be seen as white. So you lost something because of this thing. Like you should want to be fighting this too. And also, let me introduce you to some white folks who have positive white racial identity, who are anti-bias and anti-racist warriors and doing this work. And guess what? All of them are not dead, right? And so that's where I can introduce like an Ally Michael or a Jane Elliott, and some of the young people who are coming up and doing this work, or even just grab, some celebrity who, when they accepted their award, they said, I know I'm getting this award, but I really want to give it to all of the Black women in the WNBA who've been doing this for so long and are going through these things, right? Like, so how do they find mentors who are positive to say, like, model yourself after this person, right? Learn more about them. So that's some of the stuff that I've been doing. I hope that's a little helpful. And also, if parents want to do this work at home, always, giving them books and book titles to read at home and have those conversations. Yeah. Oh my gosh, Georgiana. Yeah. Decolonizing your mind, decolonizing your library. It's tough. Every day is a constant learning and unlearning. Every day is a constant battle against imposter syndrome, a constant battle of racist ideas that I might have internalized based on living in a racialized society. Every day is a conscious unlearning and reframing to have gratitude for a body that's done so many good things for me. But yet sometimes I've been taught that because it doesn't look like what society says is beautiful, right? Or if you Google beautiful people and all the faces that come up, right? Like, how do I constantly work against that? Yeah. Let me check the chat here. Other thoughts or questions?
I just have a comment.
Hi, Billy.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, when I saw your name, I remember listening to you last year, I believe. So I really enjoyed hearing you speak in your sessions. But when I listened to you speak, and my biggest takeaway is the windows and mirrors. I thought that was just so important. I really thought about it, and so I took a real good look at it, and that was my biggest takeaways. And also, you mentioned about the books and about Rudy Sims and lessons on how the student of value, when they're in books and how they're reflective. Sometimes it's distortive, it's negative, and it's laughable. And I believe it's something at my level, that's something that I can have a small impact and to kind of make that more visible for some of the students. And also the statistics you gave about the books and animals, and I mean, that was just really eye-opening, for me. So thank you.
Thank you, Billy. And guess what? It's not even a small impact. It's actually a huge impact. When we put it, I mean, so as a teacher who taught reading for many years, I realized and I learned that when you put the right level of a book into the hands of a child with a topic that's interesting to them, you can help them love reading and become a better reader. And then I learned that if I take a book that's at their reading level, or maybe a little higher to give them a challenge, because that's okay too, that's based in a topic that they're interested in, and then there are aspects of their identity that's reflected back to them, that creates a greater impact. Because now they realize that, wow, I see myself here, I'm valuable. And sometimes it's just really cool to have stories with underrepresented folks doing regular day-to-day things. And I know this sounds probably ridiculous, right? But, every time you read a story about a child who is maybe non-binary, it doesn't have to be a story where they are struggling to be affirmed, right? It could just be them going to school every day and loving math, right? And you know this aspect of them because, they use they, them pronouns or something, right? Or I love like Jabari jumps and Jabari tries, right? Because what kid hasn't like gone to, a pool maybe or something like that, and they want to swim and they're like, oh no, I'm scared, right? I've never jumped off a diving board myself, so I can imagine I would be afraid, right? Normal life things. Like he doesn't have to be fighting, civil rights in every book. So like, how can we just show them doing regular day-to-day things? I'm seeing some more stuff in the chat. Mighty
Yes.
Girl is a great book resource. Thank you for that. This year for me was not a book, but the series Reservation Dogs. Yes. So even, oh my gosh. So I kind of dive into TV sometimes with some things that I really like. And I'm watching The Bachelorette. I never watched The Bachelorette before. I'm watching The Bachelorette because there's a Black Bachelorette. And so I'm like, oh, wow. ABC or whoever it is, NBC, they thought enough about this that they said, we're going to pick a Black woman to be the person. Now, technically, she considers herself biracial because she has parents from two different racial backgrounds, and that's fine. But when I see her and I see her brown skin, and I think if anybody saw her walking down the street and they didn't know her story, they would just identify her as Black, right? And so I'm like, wow, that makes me feel seen. And I watched Minari this week and learned a lot more about that, and also was just really excited that a lot of the book was not, a lot of the movie wasn't in English, right? And so it helped me to get out of my area of privilege as an English speaker and to like read and listen and hear the differences, right? And so how that was a window for me, but it helps me to understand and have a little more empathy, but also realize like, ooh, how do I spend my English privilege? Like the next time I say like, ooh, I don't understand this person who answers the phone when I, try to get the cable fixed or something, I need to check myself, right? That's the internal work that needs to happen. Last year, while we were virtual, I tried to find read alouds read by people of color. The kids really enjoyed Michelle Obama, et cetera, reading to them. Yeah, For sure. And there's a Netflix series of people reading the books. And then Netflix got the new series for Ada Twist, the scientist. Oh my goodness, right? So people are jumping on and realizing that like we need to expand the representation in movies and books, and even just like, we did an audit of our walls on our campuses. And so we've been making an intentional effort to have more art that is representative of different folks, because even that, if you come and tour the school, you might go like, oh, okay, this, is this who's represented based on the walls? And so now you have to think about like, how do we even allow people to see themselves on walls in beautiful matting and frames and things like that, to be represented for sure. Thank you, Laura. Ada Twist Scientist, yes. And in the series on Netflix, it's not just Ada, but Rosie Revere and what's our friend who's the architecture? Is it Peck, the architect? Forgetting, yeah. Other questions, thoughts, responses, something that's circling around for you? Like what's one thing you're going to do with something you picked up from here? Or what's something you're going to continue thinking about or talking to someone else about to continue the conversation? Extra thankful for the critical literacy reminder too, helping remind myself to work collaboratively with my students to look at text from various perspectives and deep dive into biases, what is missing, what is being told, and examining who the author is and why their own experiences impact how the story is written, and what might be missing, as well as our reader experiences that impact how we take in the information. Beautiful. Not to determine if it is good or bad, but like you mentioned, to be able to supplement with other windows. And I love that. Thank you. Thank you so much. And for that beautifully written share. Molly of Denali. Yeah. Oh my gosh. Laura, I feel seen by your knowledge of all these shows. Yes, going to buy some books. And, there's somebody was sharing with me the other day, like you could go online. I forgot what it's called. Maybe someone here knows. And you can say like, I'm a teacher, I'm an educator, I'm looking for these kind of books. And people will like donate to you to help you get those books. I will carry the concept of learning as much from my students as I impart on them. Yeah. What if we go in every day and we're like, what's one thing I can learn from one of my students today? If we did that every day, right? And like wrote it down. What's something that you learned? Especially if you're learning about them as individuals, because that helps to create community and belonging, right? And so now, of course, as you know more about your students, that empowers them to be more strong in saying that my identity tells a story. Yeah. And if you're buying books, try to buy from, underrepresented bookstores and indigenous folks and folks of color, small businesses and things like that, right? That's actually a piece of activism as well, right? And fighting capitalism, because Amazon is a hard one to beat. And sometimes I really don't like paying the prices because I want to support, but I'm like, okay, that's me spending a little bit of my privilege, to do what's right. I want to have the windows and mirrors conversation with my elementary age students. Yes. Also look at my classroom library with a more critical eye, for sure. And I'm not a proponent of like, throw all your books out. I'm like, okay, what can I do to balance this, right? Or like I keep some books about Christopher Columbus on purpose. So because I love to have my third graders then go like, wait, how can you discover something where people are already there. Like, I don't even have to say it, right? Like I read them two different books, and I give them, you know, a version from the Tayano, and like, they're like, wait a minute, this isn't fair. He was not good, you know, right? And so how do you do that? Yeah, the little library in your neighborhood, for sure. Our students have been able to log into Alaska Digital Library System through apps like Sora. They just need their school login. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. Yes, Kimberly, fighting capitalism is a full-time job, everyday job, all day long job. Yeah. Thank you all so much. Thanks, Thomas Guide to Equitable Hiring and Staff Development Practices. I need that one too, for sure. Thinking about how we hire. And something I've been thinking about is how we retain too. Because sometimes if we're not treating people right, that's why they leave, right? So we gotta we gotta do them both. We gotta hire well, we gotta retain them. We gotta stop asking the wrong questions in an interview, right? There are traditional stories that were turned into children's books, even though stories change and are told from a point of view, comparing the stories to the originals is powerful. Yeah. And how do we promote people? Ooh, that piece is powerful. And the gender pieces around that as well. And, you know, don't start to talking about equitable salaries, because that will really shake some heads up. Baby Raven reads. Oh, I don't know that one. Series of Alaska Native stories and picture books. Beautiful. See, this is why I love this, because this is crowdsourcing, because I'm going to keep the chat and then I'm going to get all this stuff. And you all will get a PDF again of the presentation and all those books. And if you can't get them all, but you partner with somebody else who gets some, then you all can share. And that's been pretty awesome. And in the meantime, one sort of good thing about COVID is that many authors were putting their books on YouTube and reading them. And so you can go and get the links and you can read them there, or some of them even have the PDFs that you can use if you're using Zoom. I'm going to stop there. I want to thank you all so much for participating today and being here. I think Laura's going to come on and give us some final important steps.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. Wow, I am just blown away. How profound and insightful. I just learned that having more windows, having more culturally age appropriate books, and not eliminating mirrors really does help explore your own identity and that sense of belongingness. So I just want to thank everyone for joining us, for the wonderful chats. So please, everyone, thank Erica Snowden for today's amazing Midas Touch workshop. Oh man, we are just so appreciated for your insightful knowledge, your expertise, experiences. Thank you so much. And oh wow, very humbling.